An 82-year-old man walked into a military briefing room by mistake. They laughed at him, called him lost, told him to leave. But when he pointed to a mark on their map, a mark they'd never seen, everything changed. This is the story of Arthur Penrose, and the secret someone tried to bury for 50 years. Oliver scoffed. You are lost. Old man, this room is not for tourists. He moved around the table, young boots hard against the floor, his tone half amusement, half order. The others grinned, grateful someone had said what they thought. The briefing clock kept its strict rhythm. Arthur Penrose was 82. He stood in the doorway, unsure how he had wandered into the map room during a live exercise. His pass hung from his collar, faded and edged with years, a small flag of a life the others no longer read. Men regarded him like an interruption in a precise machine. Oliver jabbed a finger at a spread of paper and said wrong sector. His voice cut the air, deliberately brisk, a measured shove to put a stranger back where he belonged. A junior officer echoed the motion, and the room tilted toward ridicule. Arthur kept his hands on the table edge and leaned in. The way a man follows old habits. He did not meet Oliver with heat. He simply named a fact. The seam runs a mile east, he said. Not the ridge, the ford. Silence closed as if windows had been shuttered. Captain Michael Hargreaves cleared his throat and asked where Arthur had seen that. The question was careful. It held rank because accusation would have broken protocol. Arthur tapped a faded fleck of ink beside a contour and said that mark has been there since before the records were rewritten. His words were precise, stripped of embellishment. They landed like nails into soft wood. The specificity refused to be shrugged away. Sarah Ellis crouched to read the margin, her training making her thorough. She said the ink is old and the script is uneven, perhaps from a hand without access to modern print. Her tone added detail, and detail has weight in a room of maps. Oliver tried to laugh the pause away, and said tales do not replace charts. His laugh sounded thin. It did not restart the room. Then Sarah shifted the corner of the sheet, and a photograph slipped free. The image was flat and worn. A younger man by a battered jeep, a badge pressed to his chest. The emblem suggested a phoenix or similar device. Rubbed thin with service. None of the officers recognized it, which made the moment stranger. Pens scratched. Overlays were requested. A laptop hummed as someone pulled up an archive. A note passed from hand to hand, and someone asked, "Does he still carry his service number?" Arthur recited it without hesitation, the numbers coming like a small ceremony. A young voice murmured about age and relevance, but no one joined. The map room waited, an argument half made, and Arthur kept his thumb on the old mark, as if to anchor a story for reasons only he understood. Where Mockery had stood, there was now focus, a net drawn tight around an unexplained detail. Men shifted their weight, questions replacing laughter. The room had turned, not in triumph, but in reluctant attention, and the question on every face was why Arthur had kept that memory at all. The room stayed taut, attention folding toward the old sheet as if it were a wound to be inspected. Captain Michael Hargreaves rose and said, "Check the overlays now." His voice carried the authority of routine, the kind that asks for facts, not spectacle. Oliver shifted, hands finding his belt, and muttered about procedure. He did not stop the request, because facts could cut either way. Sarah Ellis tapped a tablet and began pulling archived scans with practiced speed. Michael walked the table and pointed. "Tell me what the original margin says." His finger was a metronome on old ink and newer print, marking the difference between memory and record. Sarah eased the map back and slid out a thin packet, brittle tape catching at the corner. She unfolded a loose sheet and said, "This looks like archaic ink." The letters leaned inward, made by nib rather than machine. Michael said, "Read it." Sarah read the header aloud. Operation name redacted. Unit removed. A small file fell free as she shifted the stack, its flap stained with handling. Inside lay a photograph and a folded statement with columns missing. Michael lifted the image, studying the man in it as if biography might be read off a face. The badge on the lapel was half worn, a rising bird or flame, its outline stubborn despite abrasion. Michael frowned and asked who authorized the deletion. The question landed like cold metal. Nobody answered at once. Oliver tried to dismiss the moment with a joke about aging archives, but the laugh found no purchase. A junior analyst keyed into a database and found gaps where names should be. Entries returned struck lines and stamps that read confidential, then a blank after erasure. Sarah found a memo dated years ago, initials in the corner and a hand note that recommended a change. She said the recommendation was marked for suppression. The single word moved across the table, heavier than paper. Arthur did not protest or preen. He watched as though time were a map he could read, without needing to claim it. He said the unit was withdrawn after the action, and that a private addendum noted a seam they had never spoken about in open record. His voice held the cool of someone stating coordinates, not excuses. A young lieutenant leaned in and asked what the addendum said. Michael read the line slowly, pronouncing each syllable as if testing it for truth. The header listed a region and a shorthand the newer men did not use, a name Arthur recognized, and the database did not. Pens resumed their scratching. Overlays redrew lines where the old mark had been. One officer called for the original service roster. Another asked about serial ranges that did not match current lists. The room turned numbers into motion, suspicion into procedure. For a moment, the map room became a courtroom without counsel, every man calculating whether memory amounted to evidence. Some faces kept skepticism, others softened with the recognition that what is erased is not always untrue. When Michael put the photograph down, the emblem remained, faint but telling. The question now was not only whether Arthur remembered correctly, but who had removed the record and why. The answer waited, buried in files someone had locked away, and the room felt the shape of that secret pressing at its edges. Michael folded the photograph and kept it flat on the table. He said who authorized the deletion. The room leaned in, waiting for an answer. Michael stepped closer and said, "Explain then." His tone held rank, not anger. Oliver shifted, impatience tightening his jaw. Arthur pushed a memory forward without flourish. "I noticed the seam the week after the action," he said, "and I flagged it to command." He offered no names and no plea, only a date and a reference. A murmur moved through the younger officers, part skepticism, part calculation. Sarah tapped her tablet and asked when it was filed. Arthur gave the day and a file number, his voice steady as a register. Emma Collins leaned over the map and touched the badge on the photograph. She said that insignia vanishes from indexes in 72. Her voice was small, but the phrase set a deeper history in motion. Michael ordered an overlay against current tracking and said, "Run it now." Fingers worked with trained speed and laptops answered. Lines redrew, and the old seam sat over new movement, with a closeness that tightened chests. The overlay did not feel like proof, but it felt like accusation. A junior analyst breathed out a word that sounded like damn. The corridor Arthur named matched patterns in the feed. Not exactly, but enough to demand attention. Oliver asked if it could be coincidence, and his voice held challenge. Sarah said overlays rarely lie, they show what maps hide. The sentence cut any easy dismissal. Arthur watched screens as if watching a tide. He said the seam was noted in a private addendum that was not circulated. His words hung, neither boast nor complaint, only a factual placement. Michael scrubbed his hands across his face and asked who sealed the records. The question turned into orders, and someone began a paper trail. Administration would return answers in files, and files liked time. A junior analyst found a redacted timestamp that matched Arthur's date and whispered it aloud. The whisper spread, and papers moved like a tide. Men turned suspicion into tasks, calling for lists and checks. Emma rose and said, "I will request a freedom review quietly." Her motion promised a path without spectacle. Michael nodded and authorized the quiet request. Arthur kept his thumb on the map, knuckles white. He did not demand recompense. He offered something simpler: patience. The room softened where it needed to and hardened where caution stayed required. A sergeant at the door asked for orders about a field check. The question shifted the room toward action. Michael weighed risk and said, "Prepare a limited reconnaissance. Tomorrow. Discreet." Oliver said, "We want confirmation, not conjecture." The phrase sent men into motion. Overlays saved. Requests filed. A chain of custody begun. The process turned suspicion into procedure. Beneath the paperwork and protocol, the question remained, quiet and heavy. Who removed a unit from the books, and why was a warning buried? The answer was in files that waited to be opened, and the men felt the old omission pressing into the present. Michael signed the order and said, "Prepare a limited reconnaissance. Tomorrow. Discreet." His decision pushed the room into motion. Men who had argued now taking on tasks. Names turned into instructions. Oliver barked about chain of command. He wanted clearer authority before fieldwork. Michael replied with the route and a time window, firm and controlled. The tension moved from paper to planning. Sarah began compiling files for the sortie, her tablet filling with layers of notes. She asked for access to the suppressed memo, and the analyst promised to pull the redacted folder. Quietly, through channels. Arthur stood and adjusted his coat, as if resetting a map in his hands. He said, "I will guide the reconnaissance if you permit." His voice was steady, not acting, simply practical. Oliver stiffened and said, "We need a current officer to lead. The rules are clear." Michael looked at Arthur and then at Oliver. The choice a test of risk, and he said limited and supervised. Arthur will accompany the team. Arthur named 2 waypoints by number and a narrow track that threaded through terraces and an abandoned ford. He described the ford as a place where traffic could be channeled, not exposed, a small deviation that reduced contact with the seam he had warned about. A lieutenant noted the timing Arthur gave and checked it against patrol cycles. The timing matched gaps in the feeds, a detail that made eyes lift and pens pause to mark it down. Sarah found the suppressed memo at last, brittle tape and a corner torn as if it had been handled in haste. The memo recommended rerouting supply lines and was stamped "Do not publish," an instruction that had buried a tactical correction. Oliver read the memo aloud, and his voice changed. The officer adopting the tone of someone reading rules that were bent. The memo accused nothing openly. It suggested changes that were never adopted. And where advice had been overruled, there was a neat row of initials. Emma said those initials match a senior staff list, and she felt the weight of choices made in rooms like this. Her remark was small, but it landed like an explanation sliding into place. Michael ordered the reconnaissance brief to include Arthur's route and the suppressed memo as context. He said, "We run the check with 2 vehicles, one to observe, one to probe, all under radio silence until extraction." Arthur drew the narrow track with a finger on the paper, the lines small and exact. He said, "Move at first light. Keep distance from the ford until the second vehicle secures the ridge. Then pass through the channel I named." The team practiced the call signs, and the sergeant at the door repeated the contingency for extraction. Everything became choreography, risk reduced to disciplines and rehearsed steps. As men packed maps and checked kits, Michael pulled Oliver aside and said, "If this proves unnecessary, we owe Arthur an apology." Oliver did not reply at once, his jaw working, the instinct to defend rank fighting with the logic of what they had seen. Arthur collected his pass and his photograph, his hands steady as if handling a ledger. He said nothing grand, only that he had no taste for praise, only for the work to be done right. The room readied itself for action, and the hidden cost of silence sat between the file and the route. The men left the map room with orders in their pockets and a question waiting in the files, one that would only be answered when boots met the seam. Arthur rose early and joined the reconnaissance briefing. He checked a small map folded in his palm, the paper softened by years, but exact. The sergeant confirmed routes, and the 2 vehicles moved under quiet orders. The first vehicle took observation and held short of the Ford Arthur had named. The second vehicle probed the channel, tires whispering on packed tracks, voices low and precise over clipped radio. At the Ford, a loose wire lay where traffic had eroded the bank, a shallow trap waiting to widen. The sergeant signaled, and the second vehicle pulled back. Men scanned the ground and found scuff marks that matched boot prints from an older campaign. The detail was small, but its implication was large. A radio call came through, voice tight. "We have the seam," the sergeant said. The line Arthur named was indeed a root of vulnerability. Relief and a new fear moved through the team. Back at base, the overlay matched the field report exactly. A thin red line where error would have widened into failure. Michael read the reconnaissance notes in silence. He rubbed his thumb along the margin of the suppressed memo, as if that motion could smooth an old fold. Emma requested immediate declassification of the specific memo, and the Freedom Review returned with the page stamped for release. The file showed a brief recommendation from decades ago, flagged to change supply lanes, and a hand note that ordered the recommendation suppressed to avoid scandal. The note was signed with initials that matched a senior staff list. Oliver read the page, and his voice faltered. He said, "We owe them some truth." The admission made a room that moved in routines pause. Men looked at Arthur with the slow respect that comes when story and proof finally meet. Michael found Arthur in the records room and closed the door softly behind him. He said, "I am sorry." Arthur. The apology was simple, unadorned, and for once, not a matter of rank. Arthur took the words without needing to amplify them. Arthur folded the photograph and slid it back into its envelope, his hands steady. He said, "No one needs praise, only that mistakes are not repeated." His voice was small, but exact, the kind that closes a ledger. In the wardroom later, Michael offered a measured note at afternoon roll call, thanking those who acted and acknowledging errors in old reports. He did not dramatize. He put procedure and apology in the same breath. The men accepted the balance, some quietly, some with visible relief. Arthur left the base after a short meal, his pass returned properly updated, and his name back in a roster that had once been blank. He walked without haste and carried the photograph like a ledger closed. There was no parade, no speeches, only a place set right. The final image is quiet. Arthur closing the album and sliding it into a drawer. The map room changed by a single correction and an old omission made visible. The payoff is not triumph, but repair, a dignity returned with no fanfare. Arthur Penrose didn't need to be celebrated. He only needed to be heard, in an age where new is always favored over right. This story reminds us of something important. Sometimes the elderly aren't lost. They've simply seen paths we've yet to travel. What are your thoughts on how society treats older people? Do share your reflections in the comments below. Leave a like if you'd like more stories about humanity like this one, and subscribe so you don't miss new videos each week. Until next time.